Hello and welcome back. Okay, so in the previous video, we took a look at how you can set up static website hosting on your S3 buckets. Now that allowed you to obviously host static web content on Amazon S3, but obviously you can also host website content using a compute service like EC2. In this video, I want to talk to you about something called cross-origin resource sharing and introduce you to CORS, which basically allows you to have resources in one domain in one web application, access resources from another domain. Let's talk about this in some detail in this video. Okay, so let's talk about what is CORS. So CORS is actually a browser security feature that allows client web applications loaded in one domain to interact with resources in a different domain. Generally, this isn't allowed as a browser security feature. So when you have your web browser, your Chrome browser, Firefox, whatever it might be, if you are connecting to a website that belongs to a particular domain, if that website needs to then access and retrieve data from another domain, it is by default blocked. So let's take a look at how this works. So you've got your web browser and it makes a call to the Retroverse website, which is a static web page hosted in an S3 bucket. Now, this is known as the origin. The first request that you're making to the site that you're going to and pulling the files across is what's called the origin. This is your origin web server. It obviously will have a series of files that make up your web application, the index.html, some logos, some images, and maybe even some JavaScript. That gets downloaded onto your web browser, and because it's the same origin where all of these different resources are coming from that retroroast.com origin, those requests are allowed. You are allowed to make requests to pull down all of those files necessary to render your web page in your browser. And so the origin comprises of a combination of the scheme, so the protocol that you're using, so for example HTTP, the host, so in this case it might be something like retro-roast.com or www.example.com, etc., and plus the port. If any of these attributes changes, the origin changes. If you shift from an HTTP to an HTTPS, that becomes a different origin. If you change the port, that becomes a different origin. And so by default, anything from the same origin is allowed and your web browser will not interfere with those requests being rendered in your browser. Now let's assume for whatever reason that you want to have a different origin that contains all of your JavaScripts. Perhaps these JavaScripts are standard functionality that you want to make available across multiple websites. So what you could do is you could remove the countdown.js script from this bucket and create a different bucket. We'll call it RR app scripts and place that particular JavaScript file in that bucket. Now what you want to do is update the index.html page so that it can connect to the other bucket to retrieve that countdown script that will show a countdown to when we are launching our Retroverse website. And because the origin has changed, that won't be allowed by default. So by default, your browser is going to restrict that from taking place. A cross-origin request to another domain will be restricted by default for the pure and simple reason that it could have been a bot, it could have been a malware that's trying to access some other application, some unknown domain, and therefore your browser is trying to protect you from doing so. Obviously, there are legitimate reasons why you would want to do this, as I've just mentioned, and so you want to enable cross-origin requests sharing to be enabled. So what you could do on the second bucket is enable cross-origin support. This requires you to define a JSON policy that allows you to make requests to a different origin and therefore have CORS enabled by default. Once you do this, that restriction is removed and your browser is able to then allow the index.html page to retrieve the countdown.js script from a different origin. So let's talk about some additional key points for CORS. So firstly, there are two types of requests. There are simple requests where, once you've enabled your CORS configuration, then you should find that you're able to retrieve website components or assets or whatever it might be from different origins for simple standard requests. For more complex requests, you need to also perform what's called a pre-flight request and a pre-flight response. This basically is where you make an HTTP request that first checks to see whether you're going to be permitted to perform those actions across different origins. In terms of the actual elements for your CORS configuration, so there are several elements that go to build out your CORS JSON policy. You got to first basically allow cross-origin requests. So that's the access control allow origin, which will specify the origins that you want to allow in your cross-domain requests from. Okay, so this is an element within your policy that will allow you to actually specify the origins that you want to allow that cross-domain request to take place from. You then have the access control max age, which is another element of your JSON policy. And what this does is it basically specifies the time in seconds that your browser can cache the response for a pre-flight request as identified by the resource, the HTTP method, and the origin. You also have another element called the access control allow methods. Now, this one is where you specify which values you're going to allow when you're making those requests. You can either put in a wildcard, which is all methods, or specify the exact method you want to allow. So get, put, post, delete, head, that kind of stuff. And obviously you can restrict this to keep it as secure as possible. And then you've got the access control allow headers, which specifies which headers are allowed in a pre-flight request through the access control request headers header. And each header name in the access control request header must match a corresponding entry in the element. Okay, so I wanted to take a quick look at an example CORS configuration that you could use for this purpose. So the following example is a CORS configuration that has two separate rules. So we start off with a open and close square brackets, and I've got two sets of rules here. So the first set of rule is between these two curly brackets. And what we have is basically the ability to allow cross-origin put, post, and delete requests from an origin that is www.example1.com. Okay, so this rule allows all headers in a pre-flight option requests through the access control request headers. Okay, so that's got a wildcard. And then in response to the pre-flight option request, S3 returns the requested headers. Okay, the second rule allows cross-origin get request only, but this time the origin can be any origin. So the wildcard here refers to all origins. That is a typical example of how you would create a JSON document to configure a CORS configuration. The next thing we're going to do is jump on into the lab and actually set up a CORS configuration. So I kind of want to illustrate how this works in the real world. So let's do that next. Let's jump onto the AWS Management Console. Okay, so now in order to complete the lab exercises for this particular lab, you'll need to download the source code repositories, which contains all of the HTML files, as well as the script that you will need, as well as the CORS configuration in its JSON format. So make sure you have that downloaded and available to you on your desktop, and then we can proceed with this lab. So I'll bring that up very quickly. I'll show you what it looks like once it's downloaded. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So you've got a set of files. This is similar to the previous session that we've done where we looked at static website hosting, but it's got your standard sort of index.html, which in fact has been updated with a particular feature that I'll show you once we deploy this. We've also got something called a JavaScript bucket. This actually contains some additional files as well as the CORS configuration JSON. So you will need to create two buckets for this. In fact, you can probably use the existing bucket if you have completed our static website hosting lesson. If you haven't, you'll need to create a static website bucket first and upload all of the files except for the JavaScript bucket, except for the files that are in the JavaScript bucket folder. So you want to upload all of these three, the coming soon, the error, the index, the logo, and the main banner, but do not upload the JavaScript in your main S3 bucket, or that is going to be used as the static website hosting for our website. You will then create a second bucket, which will contain our JavaScript that we're going to pull across cross-origin, which is this countdown.js file. So it's a countdown basically. Okay, so we configured this for that purpose. So let me just quickly take you through the process. So what you should have, and if you haven't already, then you will need to set this up, is if we go into our buckets. So if you don't already have this, you should create first a bucket, call it Richer Roast something. I've called mine richerroast.io. You will not be able to use the same name because, as you remember, Amazon S3 buckets need to be unique across the AWS platform. Okay, so you want to create a bucket and you want to upload all of the files that are available to you in this repository that you should have downloaded, excluding the JavaScript bucket folder and its contents. Okay, once you've uploaded that, you want to set the permissions to this bucket. So the first thing you'll do is you will disable block public access, because we're going to make it a publicly accessible bucket. Okay, and you will need to add a bucket policy. And I'll show you very quickly how to actually create this policy. So for that, you'll need to go into the IAM policy generator, and you can just click into there, and that helps you create this policy. So it's an allow policy. So make sure that you set it to S3 bucket policy, set the principal to a wildcard, because that's everyone on the planet. And for the action, make sure you select the get object action. Okay, because we're going to get objects from our S3 bucket. That's the only action you need. And then you need to provide the ARN of the bucket. So for that one, I'm just going to go back to my bucket, click on properties, and I can just grab the ARN name here. Okay, very easy. So plug that in there, paste that in there, put a slash at the end and a wildcard. That basically says you want to access the contents of this bucket. Click add statement, that generates a statement, and click generate policy. And that's the policy you're going to be copying, going back to your bucket, going into permissions, and in the bucket policy, you will edit that for there. Okay, I've already got mine done. So basically, you're going to paste that in there when you do yours with your bucket name and your bucket ARN, and then you're going to click Save Changes at the bottom. Okay, so that sets it to a publicly accessible bucket. This third thing you need to do is go into Properties, scroll all the way to the bottom, and make sure you edit this for static website hosting. You want to click Enable, and you want to provide the index document with this, which is index.html, and then the error document, which is error.html. Okay, so then scroll all the way to the bottom, click Save Changes. So that's done. Now, when we scroll all the way to the bottom in the Properties section and click on our bucket website endpoint, that will load up our website. So this is slightly different from the previous video. If you've gone through our previous video with static website hosting, we've got a new feature. It's a JavaScript countdown timer that shows you when we're going to be launching this application. Okay, so for the purposes of this lab, what we're going to do is we're going to take this section out of the website. We're going to take the countdown timer out of the website, and we're going to put it into a separate bucket. We're going to create a different origin for it. And the purpose of that is because, as I mentioned earlier, and as per the diagram, we wanted to make this timer or this JavaScript accessible to other applications. Okay, so it's a common countdown JavaScript file that we want to use across multiple applications. So rather than embed it into this particular set of documents, into this particular set of source code files, we're keeping it separate. And then we want to be able to pull it in to this application. So if I show you the source code files very quickly. Okay, so here is my index.html page. Now currently the JavaScript runs as a script file. The Java countdown timer runs as a script file that's embedded within the actual index.html page. And what we want to do is we want to take the script out and we want to make it independent. We want to keep it into the second S3 bucket, another origin that we then want to pull into this particular origin, that we want to pull into this index.html page. And the purpose of that is so that we can be able to use that script elsewhere as well. Okay, and if we take a look at the script itself that we're going to pull across. Okay, so there you are. So this is the countdown.js file. So literally what we're doing is we're taking the script itself to do the countdown, and we're going to store that as a JS file in a different origin, which we're then going to pull into our S3 bucket and call from our index.html page of our richardrose.io website. Okay, so let's go back into the AWS Management Console. Okay, so back in my AWS Management Console in my S3 environment, I'm going to go ahead and create another bucket. So this is where we're going to host the actual JavaScript countdown file. I'm going to call this one ritual roast script, okay, something like that. And then scroll all the way to the bottom and untick this box that says block allow web access. I acknowledge. And then you want to just basically create the bucket. So that creates the bucket for you. Let's go into the bucket. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to upload the files to it. So I'll show you which files again. Specifically, we're going to be uploading the countdown.js file. So this contains the countdown JavaScript. So we just upload that. Okay, so that's uploaded. Fantastic. Next, we're going to set the permissions because this is going to be a web page as well that we're going to basically access to. So we're going to create a bucket policy, the same bucket policy, except this time we're obviously going to change the ARN of the bucket, because obviously the bucket is different now, right? This is the JavaScript bucket. So I'm going to basically go into bucket policy, click edit, and paste that in there. And then you just want to make sure that you capture this ARN, replace it in here with a slash and wildcard at the end. Okay, and then you can click Save Changes, and that actually sets the permission. Final step, go into Properties, scroll down to the bottom, click on Edit Static Website Hosting, click Enable, and here we can do index.html. Obviously there is no index.html page, but that's fine, it's not a problem. And then we'll go ahead and click Save Changes, and that creates our static website bucket. Okay, so if we go to this particular bucket, that is static website hosting, it's going to obviously not load up with anything because there isn't an index page. But if you do a slash countdown.js, right, that loads up that JavaScript file, so you know that it's working just fine. Okay, fantastic. Let's come out of there and let's go back to our S3 bucket. So we'll go back to the richerrows.io. Now, when we go to the richerrows.io bucket, which has got all of your index.html files for that coming soon website page, I'm now going to update this with the slightly altered version of that index.html page. So let me just bring up my files. So in the JavaScript bucket, there is an alternative version of that index.html page. Let's just open that up in Visual Studio Code. Okay, and if I scroll down further, you'll see exactly what's happening. So instead of actually embedding the script in the index page, which is what we had in the original document, we are fetching it from a particular URL link. Okay, and you need to update this. So it then goes through the actual process of pulling out that script, the countdown.js script, and then accessing it within this web page, right? So you need to update line 81 with the actual URL of the web page that contains the countdown file. So let's just go back to the file. Okay. And that's this one over here. So I'm going to go back into buckets, go down to the Richer Rows bucket. Okay. Go to the properties, scroll down to where it says this bucket website endpoint. I'm going to capture that to my clipboard. Then I'm going to go back into the index.html page, the new one, the one that's in the JavaScript bucket folder, and just replace that bit over there. So we're going to paste our JavaScript bucket there. There we are. And you want to make sure that it's within the quotation marks. Okay, so that part is done. And so what we can do is I can now do a file and save, and that will update that actual index.html page. Right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to replace our original index.html page with this version of it. Okay, so back to my S3 management console. I'm going to go into buckets, go to my richerrows.io bucket. Okay, which has got my original index.html page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste in the new version. So that is within the JavaScript bucket folder where I've updated the new index page. Okay, I'm going to drop that in there. I'm going to upload that and overwrite the existing page. And that's done. Okay, so now what happens is when I go into properties, go down to static website hosting and try to open this website, what you will notice, okay, when compared to the previous website, which is currently in cache mode, is that the actual countdown timer is there, but the new version doesn't show the countdown timer. So something's gone wrong. So if we take a look at, if you're in your Chrome browser, go to More Tools by clicking these three dots and then click on Developer Tools. Okay, let's just bring that over here. You'll see what's happening. I'm going to do a hard refresh on this page, and you're going to see that countdown.js failed to run. Okay, so the reason is, and it's all at the bottom, if you look on the console, it says here that access to this countdown file from origin has been blocked by CORS policy. No access control origin header is present on the requested resource. If an opaque response serves your needs, set the request mode to no CORS to fetch the resource with CORS disabled, right? So because of this fact, because you're now trying to drag a JavaScript from a different origin and you haven't got CORS enabled, you haven't set a CORS policy, you are being blocked from performing this exercise. So the launches in is there, but the actual countdown timer is missing, right? Let's fix this. So what we need to do is we go back to our S3 bucket, okay? And we need to go to the actual bucket that has our script. So this is the richer rows script bucket, which has the countdown.js script. And what we need to do here is go into permissions and scroll further down till you get to cross-origin resource sharing CORS configuration component, right? And this is where we're going to plug in a CORS policy. So in the downloads that you have, we have a CORS configuration JSON. I'm going to open that in Visual Studio Code to quickly show you what that looks like. We're allowing headers and we're only allowing the get method. We're setting the allowed origin to a wildcard. Now you could further restrict that for better security by specifying the actual origin that's allowed. Okay. And then we're also setting the max age seconds to 3000 for caching purposes. Okay, so that's what we're going to use. So I'm just going to copy that. So what you need to do is just copy that and put that into your CORS policy. So we'll edit our CORS policy and we'll paste that in there. And then you want to click Save Changes. Okay, so that's your CORS policy set. Now if we go back to our richerrows.io bucket, okay, go into Properties, scroll all the way to the bottom and open up that web page. And you can see that our countdown timer is in fact now actually loading. Okay, and if we were to go into the developer tools, okay, and if I do a quick hard refresh again, you'll see that the countdown timer JS, okay, isn't creating any issues. Strict origin when cross origin is all set. It's getting a 200 response code and there are no errors showing up in the console. This favicon icon, you can ignore that. I've not got a favicon for my web page, that's fine, but the countdown timer is up and running just fine. Okay, well that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you folks on the next. Thank you.